Hi,
The
this is Scott Wagman. I'm PA here and hosting tonight's class, and want to welcome everyone. And I'm going to be introducing Elizabeth Maxwell here. I'll let her introduce herself, but some of you might recognize her. She mans the lending library at the Friday night classes at the Grange for our classes, and she's done this talk there before on substance misuse and health. And I'll go ahead and let Elizabeth tell you a little bit about herself and start this presentation.
and you can see my screen.
Sure can.
Okay, and I'm just gonna give it a little, make sure I can, yep, you saw it change.
Yep.
Okay, awesome. Well, hello. I have not done the online version of this. I have presented online before, but just not here. So this is kind of new for me. So thank you so much for having me. I'm actually in my office. I was a little worried about the tech at home. I have just a laptop at home, and so I just decided I wanted to be in my office with two screens and better tech. So that's what's behind me. Is I'm at the public health department. I work for Lane County Public Health. And I have been here for, I think I just finished, I think in February, it was 8 years. So I am a supervisor for the prevention area. And so some of what I'm going to talk about tonight, we focus in my area, we focus on substance use prevention, tobacco prevention, suicide prevention, all the things that need to be prevented. And so it's somewhat subject to what kind of funding we have. So right now we do have funding for tobacco prevention, suicide prevention, and substance use prevention, and also problem gambling. And then we do some work with some of our CCOs. And so we have some programs in our schools. You know, prevention is best if it can be as early as possible. So preventing something before there's a problem is the best. And then I think most of the time when people talk, they kind of give just a little bit of background about how they ended up plant-based. So I became a vegetarian in high school, and Marcia and I were just talking before class started. I'm actually from Montana, so born and bred. I was born in a very small town in Montana and raised in Billings, and then went to school in Missoula. I won't say what decade that was, but it was not the easiest thing to be a vegetarian in Montana at that time. I ate a lot of plain baked potatoes. My family did not know what to do with me. And so sometimes, baked potato and an iceberg salad was what I got at family events, which is fine, right? I was actually whole food plant based before I knew that I was. And I raised my family. I have two grown children, and I raised them as vegetarians. I converted my husband, who's also from Montana. So at that time, and it was for ethical reasons, we thought we were doing the best we could for animals. And when my daughter became a teenager, she and I kind of dipped in and out of being vegans, but we would go back, to being vegetarians. And so, it's better. But, I think especially raising teenagers, there's a lot of junk food that's vegetarian. And so we definitely, you can go to Taco Bell. That's been true for decades. But then a couple years ago, I actually took the Roseburg class that Charlie started many years ago, which Debbie from our class, that's how I met Debbie. And so we did that class. And I just had kind of an awakening where I thought, I'm not doing enough for animals. I'm not doing enough for my own health. I could be doing a better job. And so it's kind of interesting. Just like before, my husband just quickly was like, okay, I do all the cooking. So, it was pretty easy. But he very quickly went plant-based, not just at home, but in his regular life. And then my daughter, who's grown and out of the house and has been for a long time, she also went plant-based very quickly. So my son is still just a vegetarian, but there's hope. So maybe he'll come over at some point. I hope. um, so that's kind of my story. And so yeah, I think I've been whole food plant-based, I'd say, for probably about 2 years. I would not say I've had any miraculous health changes or anything, but I feel good and I feel like I'm living according to my values and according to my ethics. So I feel good about what I do for animals, and I think it's better for the planet and better for my health and better for my family's health. So that's a little bit about me. But tonight, what we're going to talk about is substance misuse and health. And this is just it's similar to what Scott and Charlie, what we put up in the classroom, I don't know what we call that, the banner that has all the pillars of lifestyle medicine. And so this one, the little pink arrow down there, shows you that where we're going to be tonight is minimizing harmful substances. Lifestyle medicine supports people to stop smoking, reduce excessive alcohol consumption, avoid addictive substances and behaviors such as gambling or harmfully excessive internet or social media use. One thing about this slide that I think is kind of interesting is I know that I must have pulled it from a British website or a European website, because they're spelling minimizing with an S, and I would spell it with a Z, as I think most of you would. So anyway, but I didn't change it. That's the way it is. You all know where we are. So this is the social determinants of health. And so you see our little person there in the middle. And these are just some factors that have an impact on people's health. So if we go around the wheel, if hunger is an issue, if you don't have access to fresh food, and we definitely in Oregon have we have food deserts here. And so there are people in our community that do not have access to fresh, whole food all the time, or even just food. And so that has an impact on a person's health. Whether they have access to healthcare has an impact on a person's health. Obviously, housing, so a person experiencing houselessness or unstable, we see a lot of youth in our community who might be doing what people call couch surfing. And so, it is night to night, they don't always have a stable place to go. They might be able to stay with a friend here and there, but that instability really can contribute to some negative health impacts. Mental health, as many of you may know in our community, we don't have enough behavioral health providers. And so even if you have come to a realization like, oh, I think I need some help, I think I would like to talk to somebody, sometimes there's a huge waiting list, sometimes there's not anybody available. Our mental health system, as Scott and Charlie can attest to, has really moved to where in just regular healthcare, they're prescribing psych meds, that was not true 30 years ago. That's just where we are with behavioral health. And that is not super great for people's health. Transportation, if you have access to a car that works and is, reliable, that's going to be a huge difference than if you have to rely on public transportation or a bike or on foot. And then if, you might have some kind of disability, that can really impact your health if your transportation is not reliable. We know that education also has an impact. So the more educated you are, there's a trend. Statistically, it would say that your health is better. And we're not applying this to individuals, right? There's all kinds of individuals that maybe don't have a terminal college degree and are very healthy. But in general, when we look at things statistically, that's what it shows. And obviously income and jobs. So if people don't have stable jobs, don't have stable income, that can have an impact on people's health. And isolation. The Surgeon General, I think it was about 10 years ago, started talking about isolation and the impact on health. There's been numerous studies that have found that as well, that when people don't feel a sense of belonging, they don't feel a sense of community, if they feel isolated, that can have a huge impact on health. And then environment and safety, right? So we experience that all the time. When I first moved to Oregon a million years ago, wildfires weren't really a thing, right? You hear about it, but it wasn't, and now every summer there's an impact on our air, there's an impact on, our health. And, I think that it's probably not exactly PTSD, but I think all of us, you start to get nervous, you start to get a little like, ugh, the air is going to get dirty, the air's, and we just don't know, the fires got really close to our county, a few years ago. And so that and just the general safety environment can definitely have an impact on health. And I think one thing to think about with this is how likely is it that a person only has one of these things going on? Probably pretty unlikely, right? So there's different factors that are at play here. And so what we also see is that as the social determinants of health deteriorate, your risk of substance use risk increases. And again, this is just statistics. We're not talking about individuals, but we're talking about the risk. So the risk goes up as those deteriorate. And so I just wanted to make a note here. How do we talk about people who suffer from addiction? And so you might hear people who themselves identify as somebody who suffers from an addiction. They might call themselves an addict. But if you're not part of that community, we have more of a people-centered way of talking about people. So you say people who suffer from something. So a person who suffers from alcoholism, a person living with a substance use disorder. And why is this important? Because people struggle with addiction is not who they are, right? It's a factor, but also people get better. And so it provides hope. And struggles with addiction are not, sometimes they are, but there's hope and people do recover. And so I think that language piece is important. As you may notice, I like my slides to be pretty. You see my office. I like color. So I make all my presentations, I try to make as colorful as possible. So the octopus has nothing to do with addictive substances. It's just pretty. And so I will try to keep you engaged and entertained with my pretty pictures that most of the time have nothing to do with what's on the slide.
It's like an 8-legged octopus.
That's true. Thank you. Yes, I could make that. Yeah, that's good. So addictive substances, alcohol, legal and illegal drugs, tobacco, nicotine, food. This is not an exhaustive list. It is just a list. People can be addicted to all kinds of things. Here's a few more. Problem gambling, gaming, shopping, sex, exercise, and again, not exhaustive, and then the definition of addiction, this is from the DSM. And so these are just ways of thinking about addiction. I think it's helpful for lay people sometimes, when a person might be wondering, do I have a problem? And maybe they don't have access to a mental health provider who can actually make that diagnosis. So uncontrolled use, that a person, it's out of control, right? And I think all of us know what that kind of looks like. Maybe impaired control, that they're trying to control, but not having any success. Social problems, so family problems, maybe some legal problems, DUI, anything like that is definitely an indication that there's some problems. Withdrawal, a person might try to, stop whatever it is they're having problems with. And they physiologically and emotionally and mentally feel that. They feel that there's something going on, like, oh, if I stop that, and that's even true. We'll talk about food in a little bit, but that's true of food too. And most of us have had that experience. You decide one day, I'm just going to give up sugar. Your body's probably going to tell you. If you decide to give up caffeine, right, your body's going to tell you that something's going on. That use might be dangerous. So all addictions have the potential to end in a fatality, right? They definitely have effects on our chronic health, but they can also be deadly. And so the use is dangerous. The most common one, most obvious one to think about is, obviously operating a motor vehicle while using something that is very dangerous. Excessive time, how much time is being spent on, and that can be added up, like how much time is being thought about getting the substance, how much thought is being, while the person is using it, and then after, maybe feeling, all that time of feeling bad, like, oh, I wish that I hadn't done that. And so adding up that time, that can be a lot of time spent in a person's day where it's, linked to the addiction. Unsuccessful attempts to cut back. So a person might decide, oh, I'm going to, stop doing this, and they're unable to do that. And continuing use despite negative consequences. So maybe there's some family impacts, or maybe some legal impacts, or an employment impact, and the person continues to use even with those impacts. So all of these are indications that there's a problem, but you need a trained mental health provider to actually make that diagnosis. And then these are just some substances by the numbers. Another cute animal picture. For those of you who don't know, that's an axolotl. If you're having a bad day, I recommend going on YouTube and looking at videos of axolotls. They are adorable. They're pink, they kind of smile, very cute. So there's one for you here on kind of a not so cheery slide. But in Oregon within the last year, this is self-reported use. And so this is adults. So this is people 18 years and older. 25% reported illicit drug use in the last month. So That's 1/4 of the population, you know, that's not small. And then 33% of people surveyed reported cannabis use in the past year. Cannabis is legal, and so it doesn't necessarily mean there's a problem. However, that is also interesting, right? 1/3 of the population reporting using cannabis in the past year. That's an interesting statistic. 4% prescription drug misuse in the past year. And then 58% reported alcohol use in the past month. And again, that doesn't mean problematic alcohol use, but you know, about 60% of the population is using alcohol, you know, within the last month. So it's interesting. This one is more alarming. 24% reported binge alcohol use in the last month. So that's again, 1/4 of the population reporting what would qualify as, and I'll go into the definitions here in a minute, but binge alcohol drinking. And then 23% reported having a substance use disorder, which could be any substance, and 13% reported an alcohol use disorder. And lastly, 16% of adults reported cigarette use in the last month. And that one is kind of interesting because if you stratify that by population and look at different populations, the cigarette use will go up or down. So if you looked at, let's say, LGBTQ population, that number is going to go up. If you looked at a certain racial demographic, that number is going to go up. And again, not talking about individuals, talking about, you know, population level. And then if you looked at, you know, college educated white males, that number would probably go down. And part of that is because of the targeted, what big tobacco has done with those populations, right, over the last 50 years. So targeting the LGBTQ population, targeting different racial populations with their advertising, and it has been effective. And so it has resulted in higher rates of tobacco use and then higher rates of chronic disease as well. So I just put this in here just as, you know, it's somewhat useful what's considered a drink. So 12 ounces of a 5% beer is one drink, 8 ounces of a malt liquor, 5 ounces of a 12% wine, and then 1.5 ounces of an 80 proof distilled spirit. Anybody see what might be a problem here? Yeah, and I don't have to just talk at you. People can jump in if they want to say anything. Any thoughts on why this a drink or a serving, what the problem could be? Is everybody muted? Sorry, Scott.
They can unmute. People can unmute themselves. I guess like if people drink a pint glass of beer, that would be like what, 1.5 drinks.
Yeah, so I think that part of it is that, you know, if you're going to the grocery store and you're buying beer that comes in a bottle, you have control over it, right? You know, you kind of know how many you might go home and drink. If you go out to a restaurant or a bar, a shot in a mixed drink could be really different, right? So it really depends on who's making it. It depends on if the place is having people measure. In my unit, we actually do some responsible server trainings. And so we go out to the bars and places that serve liquor in our community, and we partner with the OLCC and train servers. Like, you know, here's what you should do to not overserve. You should definitely be measuring so that people know what they're getting. But yeah, it's those mixed drinks, I think, that can be pretty problematic. And that could be true, you know, at a Super Bowl party at someone's home, right? If somebody is serving, you know, some kind of mixed drink, you might not know exactly how much alcohol is in it. Same thing for some kind of punch or something. So these are just some alcohol use and misuse definitions. So a moderate drinker is considered anybody, for men, it's 2 drinks or less in a day, and for women, 1 or less. And binge drinking is 5 or more drinks in 2 hours for men, and 4 or more drinks in 2 hours for women. And then heavy drinking is 5 or more drinks per day, or 15 or more drinks per week for men, and for women, 4 or more per day, or 8 or more per week. So I don't know about all of you, but that middle one, I would be dead. So I just don't drink very much. So I would be comatose if I had that many drinks in 2 hours. And there's, you know, Scott could go into the medical parts, but, you know, your weight is, you know, of how much of an effect a person's going to have, you know, how big of a person you are, how much you normally drink, if you've had any food, you know, different things like that. But this is just in general. So again, it's somewhat helpful just if someone's trying to think about their own use, perhaps. And you get a cute picture of otters. So I think that's helpful. And so health risks associated with alcohol. So Scott and Charlie often talk about the leading causes of death in the United States. So you got the heavy hitters here: heart disease, cancer, accident, stroke, Alzheimer's disease, diabetes, kidney disease, and chronic liver diseases. And then if you cross over and look at alcohol-associated organ damage, you'll see that there are a lot of connections there, right? So alcohol is contributing to a lot of these leading causes of death in the United States. So alcohol has an effect on the cardiac areas of the body, the oral cavity, your liver, your major organs, your GI system, neurologic makes sense, your lungs, your muscles, pancreas, bone. And then down there at the bottom, you've got your cancers, right? So alcohol is contributing to liver, colon, breast, oral cavity, and rectal cancers. And so it's kind of interesting that we have all of these diseases, and you have to wonder if people didn't smoke or didn't use alcohol, what would happen to those chronic diseases that people are dying from? They would probably be different. We wouldn't have as many people dying. And so just a note about cannabis, and you get another cute picture. That is a mini pygmy hippo, I think. She was kind of popular last summer. Some of you might have seen her on YouTube. She was a baby. I don't think she's a baby anymore, but she's still adorable. So the health risks of cannabis, and I think because cannabis is legal, and we know this when we survey youth, a lot of times people tend to not really think it's very dangerous, right? You know, they're like, it's, you know, it's pot, it's weed, whatever, you know, it's not a big deal. But there are definitely some effects. So there's effects on mental health. Daily or near daily use of cannabis can contribute to dependence and mental health problems over time, especially for youth or for people who start very early or become a daily user. Those can have pretty dire effects. Driving. I used to serve on the fatal crash investigation team for the county. And so we would look at fatalities that happened on our county roads. And what I can tell you is that when substances are involved, it's almost never just one substance, right? So I think we tend to think like, oh, somebody, you know, is at a bar and they have too much alcohol and, you know, get behind the wheel and they shouldn't do that. And then they end up hurting themselves or somebody else. Much of the time, there's many things on board. And so you see in the toxicology report, alcohol, cannabis, maybe some prescription drugs, maybe some other illicit drugs. It's often kind of a cocktail. And so, you know, just being mindful. And I think that youth tend to think, oh, you know, driving when you've ingested cannabis or smoked cannabis is not the same as drinking and driving. And it very much is the same. So, you know, having that messaging for young people in your lives. Are they going to believe us? I don't know, but it is definitely true. And then respiratory effects. What we think is that cannabis smoke is very similar to tobacco smoke. There hasn't been a whole lot of research on this because of the federal, that still cannabis is illegal federally. And so it's been pretty hard for scientists to study this, but it kind of makes sense. If you combust something and then breathe it into your lungs, there's no way that's healthy for you. And so that, you know, the thinking is that is going to contribute to probably chronic lung disease. And then pregnancy, substances in cannabis are definitely transferred from mother to child and can affect the baby. And so it's advised not to use cannabis when pregnant or breastfeeding. And another note that I will say about this is that it is illegal for the shops in town to offer medical advice. And we've done spot checks over the years, and they pretty regularly are offering medical advice. So if a pregnant woman goes to a retailer and says, hey, I'm, you know, having really terrible morning sickness, I'm not able to eat, you know, my appetite is not good. Not always. I'm not saying that all retailers are bad, but they will often give some medical advice, and that is illegal. They're not supposed to do that. And, you know, you're having back pain, you're having whatever. Often, you know, they will offer some advice that they shouldn't be offering in order to sell their substance. So in public health, in prevention, we like to say it's all connected. And so you might be wondering at this point, is she ever going to get to food? Yes, that's kind of probably why you're here. And so, yes, we are going to get to that. So how is food related to other substances of misuse? So it kind of makes sense. When you mix alcohol with other things, alcohol affects the part of your brain that makes decisions, so the prefrontal cortex. And so if you've made a commitment, you know, oh, I'm trying to be a healthy eater, I'm going to just focus on eating healthy foods, if you drink, sometimes it takes that decision making offline, right? And so then you might find yourself like, oh, I'm at Taco Bell, I'm eating French fries, I'm eating cake, because the alcohol has kind of taken away, that you had made that decision about your health before you drank. One substance can impact cravings for another substance. And so sometimes we just have associations, right? And so you might have an association with, oh, when I go to a Super Bowl party, I'm going to drink beer and I'm going to say tempeh wings. We all know it's probably not tempeh wings, but, the beer and wings are associated, at a Super Bowl party or at a certain kind of restaurant. And so, having one substance can then make it so you want to have another substance that maybe if you were feeling differently or, thinking better, you might decide not to do that. And then memory and learning can definitely be affected by substances, which can affect, the decisions you've made before you were using those things. And so what's unique about food? We do have this book in the library, and I think we have another book by him. I can't remember. Michael Moss has done a couple exposés of the food industry and how it's kind of like big tobacco. They have been trying to get us hooked. There's food scientists who are studying things like mouthfeel and how much salt does something take, so that you want to eat more of it, and how much to put a little bit of sugar in there and it'll make you want to eat more of it. So the salt, oil, and sugar. And this picture of Hugh Jackman as Wolverine, I just think is pretty heinous. Because when he does these movies, what in the media do they talk about? They talk about, oh, well, he's just eating, the super healthy food so that he can get super muscular. He's not eating those Lay's chips to get that way. I'm going to guarantee you that right now. So I think that's pretty terrible that they're using that as an advertising. And so ultra processed foods, anything that's got 5 or more ingredients, that's got salt, oil, fat, or sugar in the top 5 ingredients, things that have unrecognizable, unpronounceable ingredient names. What does Charlie say? I hear Charlie say this a lot. Where's the part of the grocery store that you don't really have to think about labels at all? The produce section, right? You pick up and you put your apples in the bag. It's apples. You don't have to think about, did they do something to those apples? It's just apples, right? And, all of us are busy and we all need some shortcuts, but, frozen vegetables, just look at the label and make sure that your frozen corn it should just say corn. Your frozen peas should just say peas. I don't have time to shell peas, but I can buy frozen peas and then you just have your peas. And so frozen, canned, fine, just make sure that you're looking at the ingredients. And so all of these things, I'd say almost impossible, because I think some people can develop problems if they've just got kind of that problem with addiction. I think it's pretty unlikely, but I'm not going to say it's impossible. So you've got your legumes up there, you've got your vegetables, your whole grains, and your fruits. So sticking in these categories is where the health is, right? Some of us were talking while waiting for the class to get started, and that's what people were talking about. These are the categories where you're going to be healthy. And really don't have to think often too much about portion control or anything, and you don't have to read a lot of ingredients because that's just what it is, right? There's not a lot to think about there. So people do struggle though. And so what are some strategies that, if you are having trouble, you're having trouble transitioning, or you're having trouble with some food that you feel like is maybe not the healthiest and you want to do something different, there are some strategies that you could try to use. So taking a breath. So, if you've made a decision earlier in the day or the week, you're like, okay, I'm going to do whole food, plant-based, just like Charlie and I'm like, I see Charlie Scott. I see Scott, and then I'm reading Charlie, and my brain malfunctioned. So as Scott and Charlie say, the whole food, plant-based way of living, you've made that decision, right? You're like, that's the best for my health. That's the decision that I want to make. And then you go on about your day, and then something happens, and all of a sudden you think, oh gosh, a candy bar sounds good, or French fries sounds good, or Taco Bell sounds good, or something sounds good, or maybe just even in your own house, maybe you live with people who are not, as healthy minded as you are. And so taking a second and breathing, right? Judson Brewer says that most cravings last less than 5 minutes. And so if you can make it through that 5 minutes, it's likely that you'll make it through and not have the thing. So minding the gap is trying to explore that space, where you've made your decision, you want to be a healthy eater, and then you're having some kind of craving, and there's some time, right? There's a space in there of where you're having some time that you could think about it. You could, try to, and so that's what it means to mind the gap. Making a plan, especially if you're going to be in a situation where maybe the food is not what you planned on or it's not what you want. It's one thing when we're at home, right? When we're at home, we can kind of control what we're eating, we can make what we want. But I know for my work, even on Friday, I have a catered lunch that I have to go to, and so I want to still be healthy. And so my plan is I try to find out as much as I can beforehand, what's going to be there, what do I think I can eat. And so making a plan about how to get yourself through those situations and still end up as a healthy eater on the other side. And getting support. I'll talk a little bit about some support mechanisms that you might think about, but it could be texting a friend or, making a deal with, somebody you work with and say, hey, I'm really trying, I don't want to eat the fried chicken of this thing. So, can we make a buddy system here and, try to help each other out. And then lastly, being kind to yourself though, right? This is a process. And so it's not my daughter, when my daughter, yes.
My class. Charlie's not there tonight.
Is there a question?
Charlie's not there.
Where?
Go ahead, Elizabeth.
Okay, all right. So just being kind to yourself. This is my daughter made this up when she and I would be vegans sometimes when she was in high school, and she'd say the vegan police are not coming. No one's coming to check on us and see how well we're doing this. No one's checking. It's not a test. And so being kind to yourself, that you're making progress. It takes time to make behavior change. It doesn't happen overnight. And so, if you end up eating something that, you didn't want to, or maybe wasn't the healthiest, the great thing about us is we go to bed and then we wake up the next day and we're like, oh, I get to start over again, right? I get a reset. I get an automatic reset. I get a new day to start again. And beating yourself up and being mean to yourself about it is incredibly unhelpful and does not help you get back where you want to be. So this is actually, I picked this up from Pam. Some of you may remember when Pam she's given a couple presentations about behavioral health. And I just really liked this quote from Viktor Frankl. Between stimulus and response, there's a space. And that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. And that's kind of what I was talking about before, the mind the gap part. If you find that, you have these intentions of being a healthy eater, and then stuff happens and you find yourself eating food that you don't want to, or, you're like, oh, I wish I hadn't had that, whatever it is, the cookie, the cake, the whatever, and fortunately and unfortunately, there's tons of vegan food now, right? So we can have Ben and Jerry's, we can have Oreos, we can have, but it's not the best for us. And so trying to just explore with yourself, oh, there's a time when here's my intentions, and now something has happened, right? Something has happened, and I feel like I might eat some food that is not the healthiest. I think examine, and I'll go into that in a second, but there's a space there of trying to figure out what happened and what happens when I get that craving, and then I might go eat something that I don't necessarily want to, or I don't feel is healthy for myself. And so each person, you have to explore that for yourself. You have to figure out for yourself, how big is that space? What can you do in that space? But I just think it's an interesting concept. And the chicks have nothing to do with it. They're just cute. So this is Rain. And Tara Brock and Judson Brewer are both authors. They both have books. We might have a Judson Brewer book in our library. I can't remember. Maybe we do. I think we might. And then Tara Brock, they both have a lot of YouTube videos. They both have books at the Eugene Public Library. And so Theirs is also about, Tara Brach is more about meditation, and Judson Brewer is a scientist who he started his work with nicotine, trying to help people quit smoking. And then he, developed some tools that he thought were helpful for really any kind of behavior change. And so it's called RAIN, which is an acronym for these words over here. So recognize. So when something starts to happen, you've made your eating plan, you're trying to be a healthy eater, and you become aware, oh, I'm having a craving, or I'm whatever it is, So like I said, Justin Brewer started with tobacco, but we're going to apply this to food. So having a recognition, oh, okay, my intention is I want to be a healthy eater, but I'm having a craving right now for something that's not super healthy. And so just noticing that, right? Noticing it without judgment. And that's what the allow piece is, right? So you just allow those thoughts, because what we know about the human brain is, if I tell you all right now not to think about polar bears, what are you going to think about? You're probably going to think about polar bears, right? Because that's the human brain. But if I say, hey, totally cool to think about polar bears. You think about polar bears as much as you want to. That's totally fine. Don't judge yourself for thinking about polar bears. You just think about polar bears. That's totally cool. Then it's taken away some of the negative impact of that thought. And so you just allow that thought, oh, I'm having a craving. What am I going to do about that? And so the investigation part is trying to think about, oh, okay, so I have an intention. I'm trying to do healthy, whole food, plant-based. I'm having a craving for something that doesn't really fit into that way of eating. Why am I feeling that way? And so you might find, oh, I feel that way when I have a really stressful day at work, or I feel that way when I have a fight with my teenage daughter, or I feel that way when I just think about the general state of the world, whatever it is. But trying to just investigate without judgment, right? Investigate, why does that happen? And then give yourself some nurturing, right? Okay, you've gone through those steps, and then you make a decision. Am I going to give in to that craving? Am I going to go get those peanut butter pretzels? Am I going to go, Scott and Charlie talk about going to Winco to the bulk section, and there's all kinds of healthy stuff you can get in there. There's also all kinds of not healthy stuff you can get in there. And so if the thought is, I'm going to go to Winco and I'm going to get into the unhealthy stuff, you make a decision, right? You decide, has this day or whatever it is that made me have this thought, has it been so terrible that I want to do that? Or would it be better to do something else? I know for myself, they had at Safeway, they had mangoes on sale this week. And so I bought a whole bunch of mangoes. So on my dining room table, I have like 5 mangoes in various states of ripeness. And so in that situation, if I was having a thought about some food that maybe is not that healthy, a strategy I could use is say, well, maybe I'll go get one of those mangoes, and, I'll peel the mango and I'll chop it up and I'll eat the mango. And also then that's the magical 5 minutes, right? Judson Brewer talks about the 5 minutes. And so by the time I've peeled the mango and chopped up the mango and eaten the mango, hopefully I forgot about going to Winco and getting in the unhealthy food. Hopefully I forgot about whatever it was, and made, but if I didn't, if I decided, hey, you know what, I really want some plant-based Ben and Jerry's right now, that's fine. That's what happened, right? And so you get that reset, you do it again the next day and say, maybe I'll do that differently, and try to examine that, why did I make that decision? And you get a cute picture of some Winnie the Pooh critters down there. So what is the bravest thing you've ever done? Asked the boy. This is from a children's/adult book. Help, said the horse. So asking for help is actually a really brave thing to do. And so these are a couple of books that we do not have in our library, but I know that the Eugene Public Library has them. I also know that they are both available on all of the audio. I think I listened to both of them. And this is Julie M. Simon. And I really like her because she's plant-based, for one thing. So she is talking about, that when you're trying to deal with food issues, plant-based, whole food plant-based is the way to go. So I like that about her. And she also just has a really supportive way of talking to and about people about these issues. So I recommend both of those. And maybe someday if we get some funding, we can add them to our library. And also, I'm just super happy that my little bear gift plays. So that's always a win in these situations too. The bears, you know, when I put it in there, it's like, are the bears going to move? They are moving. So I'm happy about that. And then here's another resource for folks. Overeaters Anonymous, also known as OA, is a self-help support group system. It's a 12-step program based on Alcoholics Anonymous big book and materials. And I think that some of this has kind of fallen out of favor. I think decades ago, some of these programs were a little more popular, and then the drug companies got involved. And so, you know, and that's great, right? I think what we want is we want people to have all the options so they can pick what's going to be the best option for them in dealing with their issue. But there's a couple things that I think are pretty interesting about this. It's free. You can donate, but they essentially are free. They have tons of meetings any time of day, US and international. There is a local OA chapter. I don't know how active it is, but that's an option. The last time I gave this talk, somebody was asking for some more resources, and I looked this up for them. So I can't say a whole lot more about it, but just that it is out there and available. If you're struggling with food and maybe having trouble getting a behavioral health provider, or, you know, having trouble getting support, this could definitely be an option. And cute cat. So and just a note on eating disorders. So these are also from the DSM. And this is not my area of expertise. I think Pam is here. So if we have any big questions about this, I'm going to turn it over to her. But anorexia is, you know, the one where people tend to be restricting pretty hard. Bulimia is where people are binging and purging. And then binge eating disorder is just that, you know, where they cannot stop eating, which is kind of what Overeaters Anonymous is actually for. All of these people can go there for any of these. It sounds like it's only for the binge eating disorders. I think they have kind of a naming problem, but I think that they actually accept anybody with eating issues can go there. And then avoidant restrictive food intake disorder, I don't know a whole lot about that one. I believe it's where people have some pretty strict ideas about food. They end up not being able to eat. They get really bothered by textures and tastes. And so they often end up with a pretty limited menu of what they are willing to eat. And then orthorexia is the one that I think Charlie has talked about, that his family accused him of when he went whole food, plant-based. And I think many of us have probably had some little touches with that. It's where people get pretty obsessed about their health and become, you know, so that they're only eating also a pretty limited, they might be doing too much exercise. And so it can actually become kind of disordered, but just whole food, plant-based living is not the same as orthorexia. And then just a note, I see this a lot in media. I see it in some of the books about health. I just think it's problematic to think about food in terms of clean or dirty. So I think there's an implication to thinking about food in terms of purity. You know, I think there's a tendency for then people to really engage in black and white thinking, either or. It can cause people to feel very ashamed, you know, if they don't do it right. And again, like I said before, there's no food police coming, right? Each of us is an experiment of one. We're all just experimenting on ourselves and trying to figure out what works for us. And so I just don't think it's helpful to demonize foods and, you know, make it so that it seems like just some things are just patently evil. We could have a whole discussion about, you know, some of the junk foods are not great, but I still don't think that we should talk about them in terms of clean or dirty. And then I just like to throw in a picture of the rainbow and Scott and Debbie and I got super lucky a couple weeks ago and got to go to a local animal sanctuary where they had 13 rabbits in all kinds of different shapes and sizes and colors and configurations. And so the rabbits are eating the rainbow, and so we should also eat the rainbow. I showed this slide to somebody and somebody said, what's a white, what kind of white thing are you talking about? You know, obviously there's like the inside of an apple or the inside of a radish. There's also jicama. I remember my mom used to serve jicama when I was growing up. And then for some reason, I don't know what happened. I decided it just wasn't cool or something. And so I forgot about jicama for like 25 years. And I discovered it a couple of years ago. And I was like, I love jicama. Jicama is awesome. So jicama is white. But there's other things that are as well. And then, so I haven't been here before, so I don't know how you do. I'm happy to take questions. We can talk. I mean, that's kind of the end of the presenting part, except this adorable cow. And then I have some other cute pictures as well. So I'm happy to take questions. We can talk a little bit. I don't know what y'all normally do.
Yeah, we can do whatever everyone wants to do. So questions, anyone, definitely everybody can unmute themselves down the bottom left corner if you have.
I have a question. What exactly is the difference between vegan and plant-based or vegetarian and plant-based?
Yeah, so vegetarian means people who still eat dairy and eggs, and then vegan just means somebody who's not eating the dairy or eggs, but in the biz, what you hear us sometimes talk about a junk food vegan, which I definitely have been at times in my, it's like Oreos are vegan, Twizzlers are vegan. I think movie theater popcorn is vegan, Taco Bell is right, and so. But then when you say whole food plant-based, that's what we're talking about in the classes that
Right.
that I showed: whole vegetables, whole fruits, whole grains, your legumes, nuts that are in as natural a state as possible.
I would say living in Montana, I live around a community that is, they have a lot of cattle. And I would say whole food plant-based is not supported in this community. But they see me and they see how thin I've gotten, and I think they would, what's going on with her? So I'm just doing what I'm doing. I let them do what they do, and it is what it is.
Yeah, I think even here, we tend to think, I don't know, I feel like Lane County and Eugene has this reputation for being so progressive, but we hadn't even had a vegan fest until we just had one, that just happened. And so I don't know, there's not that many restaurants that are purely vegan here, compared to Portland or something. So I think it's not as supported as it could be.
Does anyone have any questions about food addiction specifically? I know that's a topic that doesn't get talked about very much. I've had a class on that specifically in the past.
Well, the thing about food addiction and alcohol is that you can live without alcohol, but you have to learn how to control the food issue. You can say, no, I'm not going to have any alcohol, and you'll be just fine. But the food, you have to learn how to do it in moderation.
That's true. There's some thinking about that people can also try to figure out what foods cause them problems. So it's almost like thinking about alcoholic foods. And so if French fries cause you problems, like you eat French fries and then you just want to keep eating French fries, you can't stop eating French fries. Or I think the really common one that happens is people have a little bit of sugar and then all of a sudden something, kind of gets triggered in their brain and then they just want to have a lot of sugar. And so it can be somewhat, you're right, but that's one tactic for dealing with that, is trying to figure out, well, what are the foods that cause me problems and could I just avoid those and then I might not have those problems. But yeah, it's definitely more challenging.
Yeah.
I guess I would call those trigger foods.
Yeah.
So I have a question then, just somehow to understand it a little more. The trigger foods, so if you have trigger foods that cause some kind of inflammation, and so then you're restricting your diet to those things that don't cause inflammation. And then what about that word you said that, wait, what is it? Orthorexia. So yeah, that if you could talk about that, just to understand like a fine line of being scared that you're going to have the inflammation again. And so you want to be pretty strict, right?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I think that, and I think Pam and Scott could chime in on this as
Yeah.
well. But orthorexia, if you think about that slide I showed where it shows how you know that something is addictive, right? You try to control it and you can't. You try to put some limits on it and you can't. And there's impacts, right? So there's financial impacts, or there's impacts to your job, or there's impacts to your family. And so I think that's where just whole food, plant-based living, you shouldn't have any of those impacts, right? You shouldn't have any impacts from your job. You shouldn't have any health
Okay.
impacts. You shouldn't have, nobody's gonna, people who are misinformed might come talk to you and say, when I stopped, kind of for similar reasons. In February, I stopped eating sugar, and I have a grown daughter, and so she's said a few snarky things to me a few times, and it's like, it's just because she's not educated about it. I don't think I'm a disordered person because I choose not to eat sugar, right? And so I understand what you're saying, but for it actually to become a disorder, it has to be having some kind of global impacts on your life, that, maybe if you became really underweight or
Okay.
your doctor, did all of those health screenings and said, hey, your electrolytes are messed up, your sodium is messed up because of how you're eating, then you would know, okay, maybe.
Because it maybe became so narrow or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and like Dr. Greger has some videos on nutritionfacts.org about orthorexia, and kind of like, just like Elisabeth was saying, kind of in general, it's not really a disorder that's bad. It's actually can be good, but to a certain level in a general sense. But there's some good videos there, and just Elisabeth, so you know, the Pam that's in class is not Pam Burrell. She's not here.
Oh,
But,
okay. Sorry.
yeah, yeah, that's right. We've had a couple of different Pams. That my mom's a Pam that comes sometimes, and then there's a couple. I think there's another Pam or two that comes to class from time to time.
All right. Well, you're stuck with me and Scott then for the technical stuff. That's all you're gonna get.
It's a question in the chat. It says, does Overeaters Anonymous have an understanding of whole food vegan eating? Do they just recommend smaller portions of the standard American diet? What about referring someone to Chef AJ's videos, which are so helpful?
Yeah. So my understanding, I'm not an expert on it. My understanding is that I think that Overeaters Anonymous just tries to focus on, getting, helping people get rid of the problem behaviors. So they're not going to tell you what to eat. I think they're going to be fine with it. They're not going to think it's a problem that someone is vegan or whole food plant-based. But as far as, I think it's probably similar to most of us trying to find a community of people who eat like we do, is probably a pretty small number and hard to find in the Overeaters Anonymous community. But I don't think, my understanding is that they would be fine with it. They wouldn't say that you couldn't do it or anything. So
I have a friend who's in that, and he says that they are told not to eat anything white, like flour, sugar, that kind of thing.
yeah, so I believe in Overeaters Anonymous, there are some different sects, SECTS. So there's some, yes, so there are some who feel that way. And then I think there's some who are, it's a 12-step program, so that's a whole thing in and of itself. But I think the broader organization, I think it's up to each person to figure out, what are, like Jamie said, what are the trigger foods? What are the foods that might cause you to have problems? So.
I was curious how old you were when you decided for ethical reasons not to eat animals and what influenced you.
Yeah, I was 15, so I was in Billings, Montana. And yeah, I was 15 and just, I don't know. After being a parent, I have encountered some, not my own children because I raised them vegetarian, but I sometimes think there are some kids who are just kind of born who just seem to kind of innately understand like that meat You know, like little kids will say it's gross or something. Like you said at the beginning, you said, oh, well, who doesn't like fried chicken? I have very clear memories of being a little kid and not liking fried chicken. I thought it was gross. And I had that experience with a lot of meat products that I ate when I was growing up. And so I think that there may have been some predisposition that I just didn't like that. And then when I became aware of, you know, what was happening, then that's, yeah. And again, I was lucky, I'm an only child, and my parents, I have thanked my mom for this. She accommodated it. And so, you know, in Montana, and I just came home and said, hey, I'm a vegetarian now. And my mom became an expert at building a foil tent in a lasagna or in enchiladas. And so their meat stuff would be on one side and my side. It's not perfect. Looking back now, it's like there definitely was some meat juice probably getting in mine. But she would build these little tent, a little bridge, and mine was on one side and theirs was on the other. And so it was very kind and nice of her to support me in that way.
That's really kind, and I'm really happy that she was thoughtful and cared so much about you to do that.
Yes, it was. I think I suspect, you know, being an only child probably helps. If I'd had a, you know, passel of siblings, maybe that wouldn't have worked out as well. I don't know. But anyway, that's what happened. So we have another visitor. Sarah, you brought someone too.
Well, this was really good, Elizabeth. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah. Oh, and I have some, hold on, I have a few more cute pictures. We can't go without some more.
Oh, okay.
That's a quokka. Again, if you're having a bad day, you can look up axolotls. You can also look up quokkas. They just kind of naturally have this smiley face. I think they're in Australia. They look like a stuffed animal. So, I mean, that's amazing. And then a slide of resources with a cute frog. And for those of you that I don't know if anybody here goes to Mount Pisgah, but in Mount Pisgah, where the little pondy area is, and there's a little bridge, the big old bullfrogs are coming out. They sit on the lily pads, and it's very fun to watch them in the spring. And you can hear them. They talk. They are very noisy this time of year. So I recommend that as an activity of self-care. And there might be one more slide. Yes. In closing, choosing a plant-based lifestyle is an act of empowerment where we take control of our health and contribute to a more compassionate world. And all of those animals thank us for doing it and trying, and each one of us is on our journey, and so hopefully you are making progress. One of the things they say in the 12-step programs that I really like is progress, not perfection. And so as long as we're making progress, as long as we're moving forward, you know, that's fine. We can't be perfect. None of us is perfect. So we're just gonna learn and take the information we have and try to do a better job every day.
Yeah.
Other thoughts, comments?
I think
Elizabeth?
the 5-minute break, that explanation and using that in the future, I think, you know, that's something I'm really taking away from this.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, Judson Brewer, that one of the books I read of his is called The Craving Mind, and he kind of analogy he uses for the break and how Elizabeth said the craving will pass is the analogy he uses is riding a surfboard to the shore. So like if you're out on a wave in the ocean and you're jumping on the wave, you're eventually going to ride it to the shore. You just have to kind of ride that craving. You kind of, whether you write in a journal and describe how you're feeling, what happened today, why am I having this craving? So you're not just trying to replace it with a healthier habit, because sometimes, you know, that can work sometimes, like, okay, I'm gonna have an apple instead of a donut, but it's like, well, that's all good because you're making a better choice, but you're not really addressing why you're having the craving in the first place. So you riding that surfboard, you're journaling, you're saying, oh, what kind of a day did I have today? Why am I having this craving? And then by the time you kind of are mindful and get through that 5 minutes or whatever. It's just like riding a surfboard. You finally, it's going to pass and you're going to get to the shore and you're going to learn something. Even if, like Elisabeth said, you occasionally do give in to the craving, if you take that period of time to be mindful and do the techniques to help kind of identify why you're having the craving, eventually you'll figure it out and you might not give in to that craving.
Yeah, and like I said, progress, progress, not perfection. So we're each trying to figure it out and learn as we go.
Other questions or comments for everyone? We can always end early if you guys are done. Next week is physical activity, so Charlie will be back next Tuesday, so that'll be the last class of the 12-week series. And then we're going to be doing, as far as the online classes, we'll be doing just open forums for the next several weeks after that. And then July 18th is when we're tentatively planning to start the next 12-week series. The 18th is a Friday. That'll be at the Grange. But then, as this past 12 weeks, when after whatever class we do on Friday at the Grange, we repeat that class on the following Tuesday here. So yeah, join us for physical activity next week, and then some open forums after that.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for coming. Yeah, I'm glad that everybody came, and yeah, I'm glad I've done this. I hadn't done the online one, so this is good for me to get this under my belt. Now I know how to do it.
And your PowerPoint is great.
Oh, thank you. I try
Very,
to make it
very impressive.
pretty, cute, entertaining.
Thank you.
This Elizabeth.
Thank you. Bye.
Yes, thank you so much, Elizabeth.
Yeah, thank you all. Thanks for coming. That was great.
I just wanted to say thanks for doing all the books too, Elizabeth. That's really awesome. Thanks for this.
Oh, of course. Thanks, Dottie.
You want to say hi? Who's that with you, Sarah?
Oh yeah, this is Kayla. And she said, why is he driving the car? There's, who's that? It says iPhone. I think he has the phone on his lap.
Oh.
Oh, nice.
That was funny. Cute.
Hey, Kayla.
Oh, now
Okay.
I've only been able to see 4 or 5 people the whole time.
Yeah, once you unshare the screen, then you can see more people. Then you can scroll through.
Well, thanks everybody. It looks like we'll see you next Friday for in-person class. Scott, any other announcements or anything?
No, everybody else, think everybody here is probably on the newsletter. So if you're not, go to livelifestylemedicine.com and subscribe to the newsletter at the top. But I'm pretty sure everybody that's here is already getting those. So, so this Friday, physical activity, and as well as this or week from today, physical activity.
See your shirt. He's got her shirt on. So if you want to order a shirt, you can do that at class. Is there another way to order shirts, Scott?
Yeah, they could email me directly if they want. I have my email on the class website under About Us section. So it's just swagnon1969@gmail.com. You can email me if you want a shirt. You can get a small, medium, large, or extra large. We can actually even special order 2X large. And it comes in black and blue and gray. So it's a fundraiser for us. So they cost $28. But yeah, so if you're interested in a Live Lifestyle Medicine t-shirt, you can contact me, or get them you can order them at class as well.
Oh, and Elizabeth, I just wanted to let you know, I did especially like the octopus, and that I didn't know I wasn't muted when I made the comment about addiction being like an 8-legged octopus. I just recently dealt with getting into an older television show, and I started binge watching it, and I thought I would just stop this, and I couldn't stop it. So I was feeling like I finally did manage to root it out of my life, and I had to go cold turkey on that. I couldn't cut down and just watch one episode a day. So I was feeling like Like it was like octopus legs all around me. And every time I turned around, all I was thinking about was that silly program. So I really appreciated talking about addiction tonight in that regard, as well as constantly dealing with what cannot be in my life food wise. You can't have just one. You can't just have one when you have a problem food or an addictive food that you're talking about.
Yeah.
So appreciated it. Thank you.
Yeah, I thought your comment was super smart. I didn't put that together when I made the slide. Maybe subconsciously I did. And that's actually why I thought you were the other Pam too, because I was like, oh, that's something that Pam
Okay.
Burrell would say.
Yeah.
So it was fine.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
All right, good night.
Yeah, so
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Scott.
yeah.
Thank you
enjoy
so
your
much.
evening.
Good night.
Everybody have a good night. Good night.
Good night.